The moment Jace Yearwood saw the endless cerulean waves crashing against the shore, something inside him finally began to unwind. After 5 straight years of 18-hour workdays building his tech empire from the ground up, his body had finally rebelled. The panic attack that struck during the quarterly shareholders meeting had been spectacular and public. Now, on doctor's orders and under threat from his concerned board, the 34-year-old millionaire found himself exiled to this sleepy coastal town for a minimum of 3 months. Rest, relaxation, recovery, 3 R's that felt completely foreign to a man whose life had been driven by only one: results. Jace stepped out onto the balcony of his rented beach house, breathing in the salty air. The quaint seaside town of Cedar Cove was nothing like the urban metropolis he was accustomed to. No skyscrapers, no honking taxis, no assistants rushing in with urgent matters requiring his immediate attention. Just the rhythmic sound of waves and seagulls calling overhead. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Jace pulled it out automatically, a Pavlovian response after years of constant connectivity. His COO's name flashed on the screen, the 5th call today. He moved to answer it, then paused, remembering Dr. Hoffman's stern warning. "Your body is telling you something, Mr. Yearwood. Either you listen now, or you'll be forced to listen from a hospital bed later." With a deep breath, Jace silenced the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. The company wouldn't collapse without him for 1 day. It was a strange thought, both terrifying and oddly liberating. The beach below his rental was nearly empty in the late afternoon sun. A perfect time for a walk, he decided. Anything to quiet the restless energy that constantly hummed through his veins. Jace changed from his usual designer suit into a pair of casual shorts and a simple t-shirt that his assistant had packed. He caught his reflection in the mirror. He looked like a stranger to himself without the power suit armor he typically wore. The sand felt strange beneath his feet as he made his way down to the shoreline. When was the last time he'd been to a beach? College? Maybe earlier? He couldn't remember. His personal life had been sacrificed at the altar of professional success years ago. As he walked along the water's edge, letting the waves occasionally lap at his feet, Jace noticed a woman in the distance. She was bent over, seemingly examining something in the wet sand. As he drew closer, he realized she was photographing a tide pool, her camera angled carefully to capture whatever marine life had caught her attention. Something about her complete absorption in her task made him pause. She was so focused that she didn't notice his approach, her auburn hair blowing slightly in the breeze, her sun-kissed skin suggesting someone who spent most of her time outdoors. "Excuse me," Jace said, curiosity getting the better of him. "What are you photographing?" The woman startled, nearly dropping her camera before securing it with the strap around her neck. When she looked up, Jace found himself momentarily caught off guard by the intensity of her emerald green eyes. "Sorry," she said with a genuine smile. "I get pretty lost in my work. I'm documenting the local marine ecosystem. This little guy right here," she pointed to what looked like an ordinary starfish to Jace, "is a purple sea star that's making a comeback after almost being wiped out by a wasting disease a few years back." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Jace found himself leaning closer to look at the creature. "I'm Amber Miller," she said, extending a hand that was slightly damp from the tide pool. "Jace Yearwood," he replied, shaking it. Her grip was firm, confident. "You're new here," she stated rather than asked. "Just arrived? Is it that obvious? Cedar Cove is small enough that everyone knows everyone. Plus," she glanced down at his feet, "only tourists wear designer shoes to the beach." Jace looked down at his expensive loafers, now thoroughly soaked and likely ruined by the salt water and sand. He'd forgotten to change his footwear in his haste to escape the confines of the beach house. "I guess I didn't exactly come prepared," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile, surprising himself with how easy it was to talk to this stranger. "First time to the coast?" "First time anywhere in years that wasn't for business," he said honestly. Amber tilted her head slightly, studying him with those penetrating green eyes. "Well, welcome to Cedar Cove. Fair warning, this place has a way of making you forget there's a world beyond these beaches." "That's the idea, apparently," Jace said, Doctor's orders, 3 months of rest and relaxation or risk complete burnout. Sounds serious, Amber commented, her expression showing genuine concern rather than the prying curiosity he was accustomed to from strangers who recognized his name. It's nothing, just overworked, Jace said dismissively, uncomfortable with the sudden personal turn of the conversation. Amber didn't press the issue. Instead, she bent down again, gently moving a piece of seaweed to reveal more of the tide pool. "Want to see something cool?" she asked. Against his usual instinct to keep moving, Jace found himself kneeling beside her on the wet sand, peering into the small ecosystem teeming with life he would have walked right past without noticing. "See that? That's an aggregating anemone, and those little guys darting around are hermit crabs," Amber explained, her voice warm with enthusiasm. "It's a whole universe in miniature." Jace watched, oddly fascinated not just by the creatures, but by Amber's evident passion for them. It had been a long time since he'd seen someone so genuinely engrossed in something that wasn't tied to profit margins or market share. "You know a lot about this stuff," he commented. "I should hope so. I'm a marine biologist with the Coastal Research Center. This is my office," she said, gesturing to the expansive shoreline around them. "Beats my corner office in Manhattan," Jace said, immediately wondering why he'd offered that piece of information. "Manhattan? What brings you all the way to our little corner of nowhere?" Jace hesitated. In his experience, revealing his wealth and position usually changed how people interacted with him. They either wanted something or became intimidated, neither reaction conducive to normal human connection. "I needed a change of scenery," he said simply. Amber seemed to accept this vague answer, returning her attention to the tide pool. She snapped a few more photos, then stood, brushing sand from her knees. "Well, if you're interested in seeing more of what Cedar Cove has to offer beyond your doctor-prescribed rest, the Coastal Education Center runs daily tours of the marine sanctuary. Great way to actually experience the place rather than just hiding out in a rental." "I'll think about it," Jace said, though he had no intention of joining a tourist group activity. Amber smiled as if she could read his thoughts. "No pressure, but fair warning, there's only so long you can stare at the walls before the quiet starts to drive you crazy. Trust me, I grew up here." She glanced at her watch. "I should get back. These photos need to be cataloged before sunset." "It was nice meeting you, Amber," Jace said, surprised to find he meant it. "You too, Jace. Enjoy your forced vacation," she replied with a gentle teasing note in her voice. Before he could respond, she was walking away, her camera swinging gently at her side. Jace stood on the beach for a moment longer, watching her retreating figure. It was the longest conversation he'd had with someone that wasn't related to business in months, maybe years. There had been something refreshingly direct about her no agenda, no formalities, just a simple human interaction. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. This time, he pulled it out and turned it off completely before continuing his walk along the shore. The next morning, Jace woke to sunlight streaming through windows he'd forgotten to close. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The absence of city noise and the unfamiliar sound of waves crashing outside reminded him Cedar Cove, his prescribed exile. After a cup of coffee on the deck, watching early morning surfers brave the waves, Jace found himself strangely restless. Normally, his mornings were packed with meetings, calls, and emails, a relentless flow of activity that left no room for contemplation. Now, faced with an empty calendar, he felt oddly adrift. He powered up his laptop, thinking he would at least check in on some projects, but found himself staring at Amber's words from yesterday. The Coastal Education Center. Before he could talk himself out of it, he searched for information about the center and its tours. An hour later, Jace found himself standing in front of a modest building with weathered cedar siding and large windows facing the ocean. A wooden sign identified it as the Cedar Cove Coastal Education Center. He hesitated at the entrance, feeling strangely nervous. This wasn't a boardroom. He wasn't here to negotiate a deal or review quarterly projections. He was just visiting, like a normal person. Inside, the center was filled with interactive displays about marine life, conservation efforts, and the local ecosystem. A few families with children were exploring the exhibits, but it was otherwise uncrowded. Jace wandered through, reading about species he'd never given a thought to before yesterday's encounter. "Well, look who decided to emerge from hibernation," a familiar voice said behind him. Jace turned to find Amber smiling at him, dressed in khaki shorts and a blue polo shirt with the center's logo. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, revealing the gentle curve of her neck and the light dusting of freckles across her shoulders. "I was told there was more to see in Cedar Cove than the inside of my rental," Jace said, returning her smile. "Smart man, listening to local wisdom," Amber replied. "Are you here for the sanctuary tour? We leave in about 20 minutes. Jace nodded. "I thought it might be interesting." "It will be more than interesting. It'll be revelatory," she promised, with such confidence that Jace found himself intrigued despite his usual skepticism. As they waited for the tour to begin, Amber introduced him to her colleagues and showed him some of the research projects the center was conducting. Her passion was evident in every explanation, every gesture. Jace found himself drawn to her enthusiasm, so different from the calculated ambition he was used to in his world. The tour group was small, just Jace, a retired couple, and a family with 2 teenage children. Amber led them down a coastal trail, pointing out native plants and explaining the delicate balance of the local ecosystem. Jace, accustomed to being the most knowledgeable person in any room, found himself absorbing information like a sponge, asking questions, genuinely curious. When they reached a secluded cove, Amber handed out snorkeling gear. "The real magic is under the surface," she explained, helping each person adjust their masks. Jace had never snorkeled before, but he wasn't about to admit that. He followed Amber's instructions, wading into the cool water and placing his face beneath the surface. The underwater world was like nothing he'd ever seen. Colorful fish darted among swaying seaweed forests. Crabs scuttled across the sandy bottom. Sunlight filtered through the water, creating dancing patterns that mesmerized him. He was so absorbed in the sight that he didn't notice Amber swimming beside him until she gently tapped his shoulder, pointing to a rocky outcropping where a small octopus was expertly camouflaging itself. Jace's eyes widened behind his mask, and Amber's eyes crinkled with delight at his reaction. They surfaced together, and Jace pulled off his mask, grinning like a child. "That was incredible," he admitted, not caring how enthusiastic he sounded. "Not bad for a guy who probably spends most of his time in boardrooms, huh?" Amber teased, brushing wet hair from her face. "How did you know I spend time in boardrooms?" Jace asked, suddenly wary. Amber rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "The watch you're wearing costs more than my annual salary. You mentioned a corner office in Manhattan, and despite trying to appear casual, you stand like someone used to being in charge. It doesn't take marine biology expertise to connect those dots." Jace laughed, surprised by her straightforward assessment. "Fair enough. Yes, I spend most of my time in boardrooms, or did, until recently. And now I'm apparently learning to snorkel." Amber's laugh was warm and genuine. "Well, you're not bad for a beginner. Come on, there's more to see." The rest of the tour passed quickly, with Amber expertly guiding the group through various ecosystems. By the time they returned to the center, Jace was surprised to find he'd spent 3 hours completely disconnected from his usual concerns. He hadn't checked his phone once, hadn't thought about the company, hadn't worried about what crisis might be unfolding in his absence. As the group dispersed, Jace lingered, watching as Amber thanked each participant. "So," she said, approaching him after the others had left, "what did you think of your first Cedar Cove adventure?" "It was enlightening," Jace admitted. "I had no idea there was so much happening just beneath the surface. Most people don't. They see the ocean as a pretty backdrop for their vacation photos. They never realize they're looking at the most complex ecosystem on the planet." "You really love your work," Jace observed. "Don't you love yours?" Amber countered. The question caught him off guard. Did he love his work? He was proud of it, certainly, committed to it without question. But love? When was the last time he'd felt pure joy in what he was doing, the way Amber clearly did, showing strangers the wonders of the coastal environment? "I used to," he said honestly. Now it's just what I do." Amber studied him with those perceptive green eyes. "That sounds like a problem bigger than overwork." Before Jace could respond, one of Amber's colleagues called her name, gesturing to a group of new visitors entering the center. "Duty calls," Amber said apologetically. "But hey, if you're interested in seeing more of Cedar Cove's hidden treasures, a group of us are having a bonfire on the North Beach tonight. Very casual, just locals. You're welcome to join." Jace's instinct was to decline. Social gatherings with strangers weren't his idea of relaxation, but something perhaps the memory of how it felt to discover that underwater world, or maybe just Amber's inviting smile made him nod instead. "I'd like that. What time?" 8 o'clock. Just follow the shoreline north from your rental. You'll see us," Amber said, already backing away toward her waiting colleague. "Oh, and Jace, leave the designer shoes at home this time." With a final smile, she was gone, leaving Jace staring after her. A strange lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. That evening, Jace found himself walking along the darkening shoreline, the sand still warm from the day's sun beneath his bare feet. He'd changed into casual clothes jeans and a simple Henley and left his watch and phone behind, something he couldn't remember doing voluntarily in years. In the distance, he could see the flicker of a bonfire and hear the faint sound of laughter carried on the breeze. As he approached, he recognized Amber's laugh among the voices, a sound that was quickly becoming familiar to him. The gathering was small, maybe a dozen people sitting on driftwood logs around a crackling fire. Amber spotted him immediately, waving him over. "You made it," she exclaimed, making room for him beside her on the log. "Everyone, this is Jace. He's new in town." Jace received a chorus of friendly greetings as Amber introduced each person most worked at either the research center or local businesses in town. No one asked what he did or where he was from, which was refreshingly different from the networking events that constituted most of his social interactions in New York. Someone handed him a beer from a cooler, and conversation flowed easily around him. Jace mostly listened, taking in the casual banter and inside jokes of people who had known each other for years. Occasionally, Amber would lean over to explain a reference or include him in a story, her shoulder brushing against his. As the night progressed, someone produced a guitar and impromptu singing began. Jace found himself relaxing, the tension he perpetually carried in his shoulders gradually easing as he watched the firelight play across Amber's animated face while she sang along. "Not joining in?" she asked during a break in the music, nudging him gently with her elbow. "I don't sing," Jace replied automatically. "Everyone sings, some just better than others," Amber countered. "Let me guess you haven't done something just for the fun of it, regardless of how good you are at it, in years?" Jace opened his mouth to disagree, then closed it again. She was right. Everything in his life had become about efficiency, excellence, results. When was the last time he'd done something purely because it brought him joy? Amber seemed to read his thoughts. "That's what I thought. Well, consider this your formal invitation to be bad at something and enjoy it anyway." She gestured to the guitar player, who was starting a new song. "This one's easy. Just follow along." Before Jace could protest, the group launched into a well-known pop song from their college years. Amber sang without self-consciousness, occasionally bumping his shoulder encouragingly. By the chorus, Jace found himself hesitantly joining in, his deep voice blending with the others. Amber's face lit up when she heard him, and he felt an unexpected rush of pleasure at being the cause of that smile. By the end of the song, he was singing as enthusiastically as the rest, not caring that he was off-key in places. As the evening wound down and people began to leave in twos and threes, Jace found himself reluctant for the night to end. When only a few people remained, Amber stood up, stretching. "Walk me back?" she asked simply. Jace nodded, getting to his feet. They said their goodbyes to the remaining group, then set off down the beach in companionable silence, the moonlight illuminating their path. "So, was it terrible?" Amber asked after a while. "What? Singing badly, hanging out with strangers, being normal for an evening?" Jace laughed softly, No, it wasn't terrible at all. It was actually nice. High praise, Amber teased. I'll take it. They walked in silence for another moment before Jace spoke again. Thank you for inviting me. No need to thank me. That's just what we do here in Cedar Cove. We welcome visitors, especially ones who look like they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. Jace glanced at her. Is it that obvious? To someone who's paying attention. Yes, Amber said honestly. What exactly is it that you do, Jace Yearwood, that's worth sacrificing your health for? The direct question caught him off guard. In his experience, people usually tiptoed around personal matters, especially with someone they barely knew. I founded and run a tech company, Yearwood Innovations. We develop sustainable technology solutions for urban infrastructure. Amber stopped walking, turning to face him with widened eyes. Wait, you're that Jace Yearwood? The one who revolutionized city water systems and cut urban energy consumption by what, 30%? Jace nodded, surprised by her recognition. Most people outside the industry weren't familiar with his work. I wrote my thesis on how your water filtration technology could be adapted for marine conservation, Amber said, genuine excitement in her voice. Your work is actually making a difference in some of the issues we study here. For the first time in years, Jace felt a surge of the old passion that had driven him to start his company in the first place. Not pride in its success or valuation, but in the actual impact of what they created. I'd love to hear more about your thesis, he said sincerely. Oh no, Amber laughed, resuming their walk. If I start talking about that now, we'll be here all night. Rain check? Definitely, Jace agreed, pleased at the implication that they would see each other again. They reached a small cottage set back from the beach, nestled among windswept pines. This is me, Amber said, stopping at the wooden gate. Thanks for walking me home. Thanks for tonight, Jace replied. It was the most normal I've felt in... I can't remember how long. Amber studied his face in the moonlight, her expression softening. You know, for a hotshot millionaire tech genius, you're surprisingly okay. Jace laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. You should, Amber said. Then, with a spontaneity that caught him completely off guard, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek lightly. Good night, Jace. Sweet dreams. Before he could respond, she was through the gate and up the path to her door, leaving Jace standing there, his cheek tingling where her lips had touched it, feeling more awake and alive than he had in years. The following week passed in a blur of unexpected discoveries and simple pleasures. Each morning, Jace would wake early to watch the sunrise over the ocean from his deck. Then, without quite planning it, his feet would carry him to the research center where Amber worked. Sometimes he would join her on guided tours, hanging back from the main group to ask her questions about her research. Other days, when she was busy with fieldwork, he would find himself volunteering to help carry equipment or record data tasks that would have seemed menial in his former life, but now gave him a strange sense of satisfaction. In the evenings, they often explored the town together. Amber showed him hidden gems that tourists never discovered, a secluded cove where sea glass washed ashore in abundance, a family-owned restaurant that served the best clam chowder on the coast, a cliff-top lookout where they could watch the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Through it all, Jace found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't with anyone in years. He told her about growing up as the scholarship kid among wealthy peers, his drive to prove himself, the vision he'd had for creating technology that could genuinely improve people's lives and the planet. So what happened? Amber asked one evening as they sat on the beach, sharing a container of fresh strawberries she'd picked up at the local farmer's market. When did it change from passion to whatever drove you to the point of burnout? Jace thought about it, absently drawing patterns in the sand beside him. Success, I guess. The company grew so fast. Suddenly there were investors to please, a board to answer to, hundreds of employees depending on me. The vision got buried under spreadsheets and quarterly reports. But it's still your company? You could refocus it, couldn't you? The question was so simple, yet it pierced through years of accumulated assumptions about how things had to be. Jace looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the genuine curiosity in her expression, the way the setting sun turned her auburn hair to fire. "Maybe," he said softly. "Maybe I could." Amber smiled, plucking another strawberry from the container. "For what it's worth. The guy who talks about clean water technology with stars in his eyes seems a lot happier than the guy who washed up on our beach 2 weeks ago looking like he'd forgotten how to smile." Before Jace could respond, his phone rang, the first call he'd allowed through in days. Seeing it was his COO, Daniel, he excused himself to answer it. "Jace, we need you back in New York," Daniel said without preamble. "The Westlake merger is falling apart. They're backing out unless you personally reassure them about the integration timeline." Jace felt the familiar tension return to his shoulders immediately. "Can't you handle it? You know the plan as well as I do. They're insisting on talking to you. This is a $3 billion deal, Jace. If it falls through, our stock will take a hit, and the board will start asking questions." Jace glanced back at Amber, who was now skipping stones across the calm surface of the water, giving him privacy for his call. The sight of her so at ease, so present in the moment, made something twist inside him. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said finally. "Set up the meeting for the day after. But Daniel, I'm only staying for this meeting. Then I'm coming back here to finish my leave." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure you're okay, Jace? This doesn't sound like you." "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually," Jace said, surprised to find he meant it. "I'll see you tomorrow." He hung up and walked back to Amber, who looked up with a smile that faded slightly when she saw his expression. "Work?" she asked. Jace nodded. "I have to go back to New York tomorrow, just for a couple of days," he added quickly, seeing disappointment flash across her face. "There's a situation that apparently only I can fix." "Of course," Amber said, her tone carefully neutral. "You're an important man with important things to do." Amber. "No, I get it," she said, standing up and brushing sand from her shorts. "This was always temporary, right? Your vacation by the shore. A little break from real life." Jace stood too, catching her hand before she could step away. "This isn't just a vacation anymore. You know that." Amber looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. "Do I? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like all it takes is one phone call, and you're ready to run back to your real world." "I'm coming back," Jace said firmly. "I promise. Just a couple of days to handle this one situation, and then I'll be back to finish my leave." Amber studied him, uncertainty clear in her green eyes. "You say that now, but once you're back in your element, surrounded by all the things that made you important and necessary, will you still want to come back to our quiet little corner of nowhere?" The question hit Jace with unexpected force. Would he? 2 weeks ago, he would have said absolutely not. Now, looking at Amber in the fading light, he couldn't imagine not coming back to her. "Yes," he said simply. "I will." Amber held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then I guess I'll see you when you get back." She gently withdrew her hand from his and started walking back toward town. Jace watched her go, a strange hollow feeling in his chest. "Amber," he called after her. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Will you have dinner with me when I get back? A proper dinner, just the two of us." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Are you asking me on a date, Jace Yearwood?" "Yes," he said, feeling suddenly nervous in a way board meetings and billion-dollar negotiations never made him. "Yes, I am." Amber's smile widened. "Then yes, I will have dinner with you when you get back. Don't keep me waiting too long." With that, she continued walking, leaving Jace standing on the beach with the certainty that his life had irrevocably changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. New York felt different. The city was exactly as Jace had left it, crowded, noisy, perpetually in motion, but he moved through it with a new awareness, as if seeing it through Amber's eyes. The relentless pace, the crowds of people hurrying past each other without making eye contact, the constant background hum of traffic and construction. It all felt oddly alien now. His penthouse apartment, once his pride and joy, seemed sterile and impersonal after the cozy warmth of the beach house. As he unpacked his small overnight bag, Jace realized with a start that there were no personal touches in the entire space, no photos, no mementos, nothing that reflected a life outside of work. The meeting with Westlake Technologies went as expected. Jace smoothly addressed their concerns, negotiated revised terms for the merger, and by the end of the day, the deal was back on track. His board members were relieved, his executive team impressed by his composure and clarity. "You seem different," Daniel commented as they wrapped up the post-meeting debriefing in Jace's office. "More, I don't know, centered. Whatever that doctor prescribed, it's working." Jace smiled, thinking of tide pools and bonfires on the beach. "It wasn't the doctor's prescription that helped." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Oh, something you want to share?" For a moment, Jace considered telling his friend and colleague about Amber, her laughter, her passion for her work, the way she challenged him to see the world differently. But the words caught in his throat. What they were building felt too new, too precious to expose to the harsh light of his New York life. "Just needed some perspective," he said instead. "Speaking of which, I'm heading back tomorrow as planned." Daniel frowned. "But the integration team needs your input on the Westlake systems, and the board wants to discuss the new sustainable energy initiative. Plus, the London office has been asking for a video conference about the Thames project." Jace felt the familiar pull of obligations and expectations. It would be so easy to fall back into the pattern, to let the current of urgency sweep him along as it always had. Then, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Amber. "Rescued a baby seal today. Made me think of your face when you first saw the octopus. Hope NY hasn't completely reclaimed you yet." Attached was a photo of her, hair windblown, cradling a wide-eyed seal pup wrapped in a towel. She was smiling directly at the camera, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and something in Jace's chest tightened at the sight. "I'm going back tomorrow," he repeated more firmly. "The integration team has the framework we agreed on. The board can wait for the energy initiative discussion and schedule the London call for a time that works with Cedar Cove hours." Daniel stared at him. "Who are you and what have you done with Jace Yearwood? You've never voluntarily stepped away from work in the middle of a major merger." Jace smiled, pocketing his phone. "Maybe it's time I started." Later that evening, as he packed for his return to Cedar Cove, Jace's phone rang. Seeing it was the chairman of his board, Howard Klein, he sighed but answered. "Howard, what can I do for you?" "Jace, my boy," Howard's deep voice boomed through the speaker. "I hear you're planning to go back to your vacation spot tomorrow." The way he said vacation spot made it sound like Jace was headed to a rehabilitation facility. "That's right. As we agreed, I'm taking the full 3 months. But surely now that the Westlake situation is handled, you could split your time? Perhaps work remotely from there a few days a week? The company needs you, Jace." Jace closed his eyes, remembering Dr. Hoffman's warnings, remembering the panic attack that had left him gasping for breath on the boardroom floor, remembering Amber's question about whether he'd still want to return to Cedar Cove once he was back in New York. "The company is in good hands with the executive team," Jace said firmly. "I built this company to function without any single person being indispensable, including me. That was the whole point of our organizational structure." "Yes, but Howard," Jace interrupted, "I had a physical breakdown in front of our shareholders. If I don't take this time to properly recover, I risk something worse happening. How would that serve the company?" There was a long pause. "You're right, of course," Howard finally conceded. "It's just that, well, the board has grown accustomed to your particular touch with these matters." "And I'll be back, stronger and more clear-headed than before," Jace promised. "But right now, I need to finish what I started in Cedar Cove." After ending the call, Jace stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, looking out at the Manhattan skyline glittering in the night. It was beautiful, in its way, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, but for the first time, it didn't feel like home. He picked up his phone and texted Amber. "NY hasn't reclaimed me. See you tomorrow. Still on for dinner?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Absolutely. I know a place with a view that even a city boy like you will appreciate." Jace smiled, looking forward to returning to Cedar Cove with an eagerness that surprised him. Somehow, in just 2 weeks, that small coastal town had begun to feel more like home than the city where he'd built his empire. When Jace's plane landed at the small regional airport near Cedar Cove the next afternoon, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The drive back to town in his rental car, windows down to let in the fresh coastal air, only heightened his sense of returning to somewhere he belonged. He'd arranged to meet Amber for dinner at 7, which gave him time to return to the beach house and prepare. As he showered and changed into casual but elegant clothes, dark jeans and a soft blue button-down shirt that brought out his eyes, Jace realized he was nervous. This wasn't a business dinner or a networking event. This was a real date with a woman who saw him as a person, not as Jace Yearwood, tech millionaire and CEO. At precisely 7 o'clock, he knocked on the door of Amber's cottage, a bouquet of wildflowers in hand. He'd spotted them at a roadside stand on the drive back and impulsively pulled over to buy them, something he couldn't remember doing for a woman before. When Amber opened the door, Jace's carefully prepared greeting died on his lips. She was wearing a simple sundress in a deep teal that complemented her eyes, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive styling or designer labels, natural, genuine, radiantly herself. "You came back," she said with a smile that lit up her whole face. "I promised I would," Jace replied, holding out the flowers. "These made me think of you." Amber took the bouquet, burying her nose in the colorful blooms. "They're beautiful, thank you." She stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. "Come in for a minute while I put these in water." Jace followed her into the cottage, immediately charmed by its cozy interior. Unlike his sterile apartment or the professionally decorated beach house, Amber's home clearly reflected her personality. Shelves lined with books about marine biology and ecology shared space with framed photos of ocean scenery and what appeared to be family gatherings. A collection of sea glass in various colors caught the evening light from a window, and a comfortable-looking couch was draped with a hand-knit throw. "This place suits you," Jace commented as Amber arranged the flowers in a simple glass vase. "I've lived here since I finished grad school," she said, placing the vase on a small dining table by the window. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's perfect," Jace said sincerely. "It feels lived in, personal. My place in New York is, well, it could be a furniture showroom for all the personality it has." Amber looked at him curiously. "Why is that, do you think?" The question was typical. Amber direct, insightful, and not easily deflected. "I guess I've never really been home enough to make it feel like one," Jace admitted. "It's just a place to sleep between work days." Amber nodded thoughtfully. "And the beach house here? Have you made that feel like home at all?" "Not really," Jace said. "Though I've spent more time there in the past couple weeks than I have in my apartment in months." "Maybe that's something to think about," Amber suggested gently. Then, changing the subject, she smiled and picked up a small backpack. "Ready for dinner with a view?" Jace raised an eyebrow. "Are we not going to a restaurant?" "I said I knew a place with a view. I didn't say it was a restaurant," Amber replied with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Do you trust me?" "Surprisingly, yes," Jace found himself saying. "Good answer. Come on, city boy. Adventure awaits." Amber led him back to her modest car, tossing the backpack in the back seat. As they drove, she kept their destination a mystery, instead asking about his brief return to New York. Jace found himself telling her more than he'd intended about the Westlake merger, the pressure from his board, and his realization that the city no longer felt like home. "It's strange," he said as they turned onto a narrow road that wound up into the forested hills above Cedar Cove. "I built my entire life there, but being back felt like wearing clothes that don't quite fit anymore." Amber glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "People change, Jace. Sometimes the lives we build for ourselves stop fitting who we're becoming." Before he could respond to this unexpectedly profound observation, Amber pulled the car into a small turnout and shut off the engine. "We're here." "Well, almost. There's a short hike from here." "A hike?" Jace looked down at his leather loafers, not exactly ideal hiking footwear. Amber laughed. Don't worry, it's an easy trail. But I'm starting to think we need to take you shopping for some proper outdoor shoes if you're going to stay in Cedar Cove. If? The word hung between them, unaddressed as they got out of the car. Amber retrieved her backpack and led the way to a trailhead marked by a weathered wooden sign. The path was indeed easy, winding gently uphill through a fragrant pine forest. As they walked, the sound of the ocean grew louder, though it remained hidden from view. Jace found himself relaxing into the rhythm of their hike, enjoying the simple pleasure of moving his body through the natural environment, Amber's presence beside him comfortable and grounding. After about 20 minutes, the trees thinned, and suddenly they emerged onto a rocky promontory. Jace stopped, momentarily stunned by the vista before them. The viewpoint overlooked the entire coastline of Cedar Cove, with the town nestled along the shore and the vast Pacific stretching to the horizon, painted in shades of gold and pink by the setting sun. Worth the hike? Amber asked, watching his face. Definitely, Jace breathed, taking in the spectacular panorama. This is incredible. Amber smiled, clearly pleased by his reaction. She led him to a flat area of rock and began unpacking her backpack, revealing a neatly packed picnic dinner, crusty bread, local cheese, grilled chicken, fresh fruit, and a bottle of white wine. I hope you're not disappointed that we're not at some fancy restaurant, she said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice for the first time since he'd met her. Jace sat down beside her on the rock, helping her unpack the simple but perfect meal. Are you kidding? This beats any five-star restaurant I've ever been to. The relief on her face was quickly replaced by her usual confidence. I thought you might say that. There's something about eating outdoors that makes everything taste better. As they ate, sharing the food and conversation with equal ease, Jace found himself studying Amber in the golden light of the setting sun. She was unlike any woman he'd ever dated in New York. Those relationships had been based on mutual ambition, shared social circles, or sometimes simple convenience. With Amber, there was a connection that went deeper, a sense of seeing and being seen that was both terrifying and exhilarating. What? She asked, catching him looking at her. I was just thinking how glad I am that I had that panic attack, Jace said honestly. Amber laughed in surprise. That's not something you hear every day. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have come to Cedar Cove. I wouldn't have met you. Jace reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. And that would have been a tragedy I never even knew about. Amber's laughter faded, her expression softening as she looked at him. You know, when I first met you on the beach that day, I thought you were just another stressed-out executive who would spend his vacation answering emails and counting the days until he could get back to his important life. That was a fair assessment, Jace admitted. It's what I expected, too. What changed? Jace thought about it, his hand still lingering near her face. You showed me tide pools, he said simply. You made me look closer at things I would have walked right past, including myself, I think. Amber's eyes searched his, and whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. Slowly, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Jace answered by cupping her face in his hands and deepening the kiss, pouring into it all the feelings he hadn't quite found the words for yet. Amber responded in kind, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, her body leaning into his. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and blue. I've been wanting to do that for days, Amber confessed, her cheeks flushed. Why didn't you? Jace asked, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her jaw. Because I wasn't sure you'd come back from New York, she said honestly. I didn't want to start something that would end before it really began. I'm here, Jace said simply, and I don't want this to end. What about when your 3 months are up? Amber asked, voicing the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. It was a valid question, one Jace had been asking himself since he'd returned to Cedar Cove. His company was in New York. His life, or what had passed for it, was there. But sitting here with Amber, watching the first stars appear over the ocean, He couldn't imagine going back to that existence full time. "I don't know exactly," he said honestly, "but I do know that whatever happens next needs to include you." Amber smiled, the uncertainty in her eyes replaced by warmth. "I like the sound of that." They stayed on the promontory until well after dark, talking, sharing occasional kisses, and watching the moon rise over the water. When they finally packed up and hiked back to the car by flashlight, Jace felt a contentment he couldn't remember experiencing before, as if a piece of himself that had been missing had finally clicked into place. At Amber's cottage, he walked her to the door, both of them reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you for tonight," Jace said, taking both her hands in his. "It was perfect." "Even without the fancy wine list and white tablecloths," Amber teased. "Especially without those things," Jace assured her. He leaned down to kiss her goodnight, a kiss that lingered with promise and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, Amber looked up at him with a smile that made his heart skip. "Tomorrow's my day off. Want to help me clean up a section of beach? Very romantic garbage bags, gloves, the works." Jace laughed. "With you? Absolutely." As he walked back to his car, Jace realized he was happier than he'd been in years, possibly ever. Something fundamental was shifting inside him, a reorientation of priorities and possibilities that both excited and terrified him. Whatever came next, he knew one thing with certainty. His life would never be the same after Cedar Cove. After Amber. The following weeks unfolded in a pattern of simple joys and deepening connection. Jace and Amber spent almost every day together, dividing their time between her work at the research center, beach cleanups, hikes to hidden coastal spots, and quiet evenings at her cottage or his beach house. To Jace's surprise, he found himself completely absorbed in helping with Amber's research projects. His technical knowledge proved unexpectedly useful as they worked on developing more efficient methods for monitoring coastal water quality. He even found himself sketching designs for portable testing devices that could be deployed by citizen scientists to expand their data collection range. "You know," Amber said one afternoon as they sat on the research center's dock, reviewing results from their latest water samples, "your company could probably develop something like this on a larger scale. It would revolutionize how we track ocean health." Jace looked up from the laptop where he'd been entering data. "You're right. It would be a natural extension of our water purification technology." He paused, considering. "Actually, we've been looking for new directions for our sustainability division. This could be perfect." Amber's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd consider it?" "More than consider it," Jace said, the idea taking hold in his mind. "I could have our R&D team start working on prototypes immediately. If we could create an affordable, accurate system for community-based water monitoring, the environmental impact could be huge. And the commercial applications aren't exactly small either," Amber pointed out pragmatically. "Every coastal community, research center, and environmental agency would want access to that kind of technology." Jace nodded, already mentally drafting an email to his innovation team. For the first time in years, he felt genuine excitement about a new project, not because of its profit potential, though that was certainly there, but because of the real-world impact it could have. "This is what I've been missing," he said, almost to himself. "What do you mean?" Amber asked, moving to sit beside him on the dock, her feet dangling beside his over the water. "The purpose behind the work. I started my company to create technology that actually helped people and the planet. Somewhere along the way, I got so caught up in growth targets and market share that I lost sight of why I was doing it in the first place." Amber rested her head on his shoulder. "It happens to a lot of people. The means become the end." "But it doesn't have to stay that way," Jace said, wrapping an arm around her. "I could refocus the company on projects like this, innovations that combine environmental benefits with sustainable business models." "That sounds like the Jace Yearwood who gets stars in his eyes when he talks about clean water technology," Amber said softly, looking up at him. Jace kissed her forehead. "I think he's making a comeback." That evening, energized by their conversation, Jace made several calls to key members of his executive team, outlining his vision for the new coastal monitoring initiative. To his relief, they were enthusiastic about the direction, seeing both the mission alignment and the business potential. As the weeks passed, Jace found himself working remotely for a few hours each day, but with a renewed sense of purpose and without the all-consuming stress that had characterized his previous work habits. He was more efficient, more focused, and ultimately more effective in the time he did dedicate to the company. The rest of his time belonged to Amber and to the simple pleasures of life in Cedar Cove. They fell into an easy rhythm together, their relationship deepening naturally. Jace met Amber's friends and became a regular at local gatherings. To his surprise, he found himself developing genuine friendships with people who had no idea of his net worth or business acumen, people who simply enjoyed his company for who he was. One evening, about 2 months into Jace's stay, they were cooking dinner together in Amber's cottage. Jace was chopping vegetables while Amber stirred a pot of her grandmother's clam chowder recipe, the radio playing softly in the background. "I got an interesting call today," Amber said casually, though something in her tone made Jace look up from the cutting board. "Oh?" "A research institute in San Diego. They're expanding their coastal conservation program and looking for someone to head their field studies division." She kept her eyes on the pot, not meeting his gaze. "They've apparently been following my work here. It's a pretty amazing opportunity." Jace set down the knife, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. "That sounds incredible, Amber. Are you considering it?" She finally looked at him, her expression conflicted. "I don't know. It would be a significant step up professionally, with more resources and a broader impact range than what we can do here." "But," Jace prompted gently, hearing the hesitation in her voice. "But it would mean leaving Cedar Cove, leaving my friends, my home." She paused, the unspoken "leaving you" hanging in the air between them. Jace moved to her, turning off the stove burner and taking both her hands in his. "Amber, listen to me. You are brilliant at what you do. If this opportunity would help you make a bigger difference in the work you're passionate about, you should absolutely consider it." "But what about us?" she asked directly, her green eyes searching his face. "We've never really talked about what happens after your 3 months here. There's only a few weeks left, and then what? You go back to New York. I maybe go to San Diego and we try to make it work with 3,000 miles between us?" The question had been hovering on the edges of Jace's consciousness for weeks. His time in Cedar Cove had transformed him, and much of that transformation was inextricably linked to Amber. The thought of returning to his old life without her was increasingly impossible to imagine. "What if I didn't go back to New York? At least, not permanently," he said, the idea crystallizing as he spoke it aloud. Amber's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about this a lot," Jace admitted. "The company doesn't actually need me in New York full-time. Most of our work is digital. Our teams are spread across multiple cities already, and we have a solid executive leadership team in place." "Are you saying you'd consider staying in Cedar Cove?" Amber asked, hope and skepticism mingling in her voice. "Or San Diego," Jace said, watching her expression carefully. "Or splitting time between locations. The point is, I don't have to choose between my company and what we're building together." Amber's face softened. "Jace, I don't want you to upend your entire life for me." "That's just it," he said, drawing her closer. "Being here, being with you, it's not upending my life. It's finding it again. The past 2 months have been the happiest, most fulfilled I've been in years, maybe ever. But your company can benefit from a CEO who isn't burned out and miserable," Jace finished for her. "Look at what we've accomplished with the Coastal Monitoring Project in just a few weeks of part-time work. Imagine what innovations might be possible if I maintain this balance long-term." Amber studied his face, as if searching for any hint of uncertainty. "You're serious about this?" "Completely," Jace assured her. "I love you, Amber. I'm not ready to lose what we've found here." The words had slipped out naturally, without premeditation, but Jace didn't regret them. They were true. He had fallen in love with this remarkable woman who had shown him a different way of seeing the world and himself. Amber's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she whispered. I think I have since that first day on the beach when you asked about the purple sea star with such genuine curiosity. Jace pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion welling up inside him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "So, San Diego?" he asked softly. Amber smiled. "You'd really consider moving there if I take this job?" "Absolutely. It's actually perfect timing. We've been talking about establishing a West Coast office for years. This could be the catalyst to make it happen." "What about Cedar Cove? I know how much you've come to love it here." Jace considered this. "Maybe we keep a place here too, somewhere to escape when city life gets overwhelming. The best of both worlds." Amber's smile widened. "I like the way you think, Yearwood." As they returned to cooking dinner, planning and dreaming together about the possibilities ahead, Jace marveled at how completely his life had changed in just 2 months. He had come to Cedar Cove broken, exhausted, and disconnected from himself. He would leave it whole, energized, and deeply in love with Amber, with his work again, and with the life they could build together. That night, as they sat on Amber's small porch watching stars appear over the ocean, Jace knew with absolute certainty that his doctor-prescribed vacation had given him something far more valuable than rest. It had given him a future worth building, with a woman who reminded him every day what really mattered. The following week passed in a whirlwind of plans and decisions. Amber officially accepted the position in San Diego after a lengthy video interview that impressed the Research Institute's directors. Jace held a virtual board meeting to propose establishing a significant West Coast presence for Yearwood Innovations, with himself dividing his time between there and New York. To his surprise, the board was supportive. His improved health and renewed innovation drive over the past months had not gone unnoticed, nor had the excitement around the new coastal monitoring technology they were developing. "You seem more like yourself than you have in years," Howard commented after the other board members had signed off. "Whatever you found in California, it agrees with you." Jace smiled, thinking of Amber, who was at that moment packing up her research equipment at the center. "It definitely does." With their professional futures aligning in San Diego, Jace and Amber spent their remaining time in Cedar Cove, saying goodbye to the place where they had found each other. They revisited their favorite spots, the tide pool where they'd first met, the bonfire beach, the promontory where they'd had their first date. On their last weekend in town, Amber's friends threw them a goodbye party at the local pub. As Jace looked around at the faces that had become familiar and dear to him over the past months, he realized he had formed more genuine connections in this small town than he had in years in New York. "You know, you two are always welcome back," said Ted, the research center's director, raising his glass in a toast. "Cedar Cove has a way of calling its people home." "We'll be back," Amber promised, her hand finding Jace's under the table. "We're keeping the beach house." Jace had purchased the rental property the week before, unable to bear the thought of never returning to the place where his life had changed so dramatically. It would be their retreat, a place to reconnect with each other and the simpler rhythms of coastal life whenever the demands of their careers grew too intense. On their final morning in Cedar Cove, Jace woke early and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Amber. They had spent the night at the beach house surrounded by packed boxes ready for the movers. He made coffee and took it out to the deck, watching the sunrise over the ocean one last time before their departure. As the golden light spread across the water, Jace reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 3 months ago, he had arrived broken and resentful, viewing this small coastal town as a prison rather than a sanctuary. Now, he was leaving whole, in love, and with a renewed sense of purpose that extended beyond balance sheets and market valuations. He heard the sliding door open behind him and turned to see Amber wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill, her hair tousled from sleep. "I woke up and you were gone," she said, coming to stand beside him at the railing. "Sorry, I wanted to watch one more sunrise here before we leave." Amber leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close against the cool morning air. "It won't be our last Cedar Cove sunrise," she reminded him. "We'll be back." "I know," Jace said, "but this one feels special." It's the first sunrise of our next chapter together." Amber looked up at him, her expression soft with love. "Have I told you lately that I'm glad you had that panic attack?" Jace laughed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I believe you have, and I'm grateful every day that it brought me here. To you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sun rose fully above the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. As the light strengthened, illuminating the beach where they had first met, Jace felt a sense of perfect rightness settle over him. He had come to Cedar Cove seeking rest, a temporary respite from the life he had built. He was leaving with so much more renewed passion for his work, a healthier perspective on what constituted success, and most importantly, a love he hadn't been looking for, but now couldn't imagine living without. "Ready for our new adventure?" Amber asked as the sun cleared the horizon, fully risen to signal the start of a new day. Jace looked down at her. This remarkable woman who had changed everything simply by showing him a tide pool on a beach he'd been too preoccupied to really see. "With you? I'm ready for anything." Hand in hand they went inside to prepare for their departure, carrying with them the lessons of Cedar Cove that sometimes the greatest discoveries come when we least expect them, that real wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts, and that sometimes a doctor-ordered vacation can lead to the most important journey of all. 1 year later, the San Diego sunset painted the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks as Jace stood on the balcony of their oceanfront home, watching sailboats returning to the harbor. In the year since they'd left Cedar Cove, life had transformed in ways he could never have predicted. Yearwood Innovations' West Coast headquarters was thriving, with the Coastal Monitoring Technology Division now officially called the Miller Initiative, in honor of Amber becoming one of their fastest-growing segments. They had partnered with research institutions across the Pacific Rim, including Amber's employer, to deploy monitoring systems that were already yielding valuable data about ocean health and pollution patterns. Jace divided his time between San Diego and New York, though the balance had shifted increasingly toward California. His executive team had stepped up remarkably, proving what he had suspected all along, that the company could function perfectly well without his constant presence. More importantly, he and Amber had built a life together that honored both their professional passions and their personal relationship. Their home overlooking the Pacific was filled with both sophisticated technology and items collected from their beach walks, sea glass in glass jars, interesting shells, and framed photographs of Cedar Cove. They returned to their beach house there every few months, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes for longer stretches. Jace had never again experienced the crushing anxiety and burnout that had first driven him there. The balance he had found between work and rest, ambition and contentment, the drive to achieve, and the capacity to simply be, had transformed not just his health, but his entire approach to life. The sliding door opened behind him, and Amber joined him on the balcony, slipping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his back. "What are you thinking about out here? You've been staring at the ocean for ages," she asked. Jace turned in her embrace to face her. "I was thinking about how much has changed in a year, how close I came to missing all of this because I was too busy being important to notice what was important." Amber smiled up at him. "Well, you figured it out eventually. Some people never do." "I had help," Jace said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "A very persistent marine biologist who wouldn't let me hide behind my title and bank account." "Lucky for you," Amber teased. "The luckiest," Jace agreed seriously, "which is actually something I wanted to talk to you about." He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the small box he'd been carrying for days, waiting for the perfect moment. Looking into Amber's curious green eyes, he realized there would never be a better time than now, with the sunset reflecting off the ocean that had brought them together. Jace took a deep breath and dropped to one knee, holding the box up and opening it to reveal a ring. The central diamond was flanked by 2 sea-green stones, the exact color of Amber's eyes, set in a band designed to evoke the shape of a wave. "Amber Miller, you changed everything for me. You showed me a world I was too blind to see, taught me how to truly live instead of just exist, and loved me when I was still learning how to love myself. Will you marry me? Amber's eyes widened, then filled with tears as she nodded, seemingly unable to speak for a moment. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, absolutely yes. Jace slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into his arms, kissing her with all the love he felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Amber looked down at the ring sparkling on her hand. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It reminds me of the ocean." "That was the idea," Jace said. "I wanted you to always carry a piece of where we found each other." Amber's smile widened. "Speaking of which, I have a suggestion for the wedding." "I'm all ears. What if we get married in Cedar Cove, on the beach where we first met?" The image immediately felt right to Jace, exchanging vows on the same shore where he had first approached a woman photographing a tide pool, with no idea how completely that simple interaction would change his life. "I think that's perfect," he said, full circle. Later that night, as they lay in bed planning their wedding and their future, Jace reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought him here. A panic attack, a doctor's ultimatum, a forced vacation, all things he had resisted and resented at the time, had led him to the greatest happiness he had ever known. Sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected beginnings. A millionaire seeking rest had found something infinitely more valuable by the shore, his bride, his joy, and a life worth living with his whole heart.